eliminados. Hello, everybody. How are you? AOC equals austerity, opposition, control. Pretty good. And Laura says, hi, everyone. Kay says, wow, I got a notice tonight. 2 nights in a row, Kay. What's going on with Facebook? Amber says, what's up, everybody? Lana says, SHIT, so happy it's Thursday, laugh out loud. Greetings from Minneapolis, sharing to Twitter. And most people are happy when it's Friday. What happened to Friday, Lana? Dolores says hello. Kay says share. Steve says good evening all. Go Start says austerity, opposition, control. Kay says hi Steve. Carmen says hi friends and guests. Nice to be here. Steve says hi Kay. Steve says shared. Russ Goldman says evening Dr. Joe. Hi Russ. I don't think you need to call me doctor all the time, do you, Russ? I don't have anything against it, but I like to keep things informal. So, here we are. The topic for tonight is, will we go over the infrastructure cliff? Why did I even think that was the problem? And there's Bonnie. Hi, honey. So, first we have to look at what Bernie is doing or saying. He was doing this a little while ago. I think this was from July 22nd or so. This is from Truth Out. Sanders touts the reconciliation bill with universal pre-K and guaranteed sick leave. This is by Sharon Zhang of Truth Out. Zhang. July 22nd, 2021. He talks about the $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill as a once-in-a-generation opportunity to act on the climate crisis, reform the tax code, and provide support for a struggling working class. Well, I don't know how he can claim that, because if this is our only opportunity to act on the climate crisis, what's in that bill is not enough to solve the climate problem, and we're all dead ducks. So he couldn't have really meant that. But anyway, the biggest win for the working class in generations is within reach. I think I've said this before. Okay, I'm going to say it again. You can't compare what you're accomplishing to what has been previously accomplished. That does no good. There are problems we have to solve. The issue always is whether you're doing something that's getting us towards a solution of the various problems we have. Whether a bill is good or bad has to be measured in terms of the problems that it supports to contribute to solving. That's the way we have to evaluate the $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill. And I think you all know it. We have an existential problem. If we don't solve the problem, it doesn't matter how great any bill is compared to the crap that we've been doing for the last 40 years. That's not the relevant comparison. The relevant comparison is how far it fulfills our needs. Quote, the biggest win for the working class in generations is within reach. He wrote about the bill in The Guardian. And with the wide and growing disparities between lowest earners in the U.S. and the top 1%, he emphasized now is the time for the bill. Again, that's debatable if the bill doesn't really solve our problems. While billionaires are able to exploit tax loopholes and low statutory tax rates to dodge taxes, sometimes entirely, millions of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, the senator pointed out. We've been hearing that from Bernie since he started running for president. When was that? 2014, 2015. That is not new. He points out that the bill is timely and sorely needed because of the climate crisis. What the heck is happening here? Hang on a second. I have to make sure.
My stuff is getting.
I have to make sure. Oh, here it is. I thought for a second I was losing power. Bonnie is adjusting things for me now. Sanders, yeah, it looks good now. Sanders also pointed out the bill is timely and sorely needed because of the acceleration of the climate crisis. Climate change is largely unmitigated in the United States, and even as just the last weeks have shown, it's already having deadly effects and threatening the fabric of our society. That's Sharon Zhang says that. Bernie said, we must stand up to the greed of the fossil fuel industry, transform our energy system, and lead the world in combating climate change. Absolutely agreed. The question is, how far towards getting there does this bill get us? The Democrats' reconciliation bill aims to tackle climate and socioeconomic issues at once. $3.5 trillion is less than Sanders had originally proposed, but he said it's still enough to get everything he wants done just for a shorter length of time. Somehow, I doubt that. I doubt the truth of that, everybody. He might be saying that in this bill, he would be doing everything he wanted to do for the $6 trillion bill just for a shorter length of time. But then that raises the issue of, was the $6 trillion bill, was the $6 trillion bill enough? Was he kidding us when he put forward his $16.2 trillion bill in his platform when he was running for president in 2020? I don't think so. I think he's kidding us now. Democrats, like Senator Chuck Schumer, have hailed the bill, if it passes, as the most consequential bill for the working class since the New Deal. Again, the comparison to and what's been happening over the last, 70 years? Sanders had a big hand in crafting the bill. It's because of his original proposal of $6 trillion. The bill is as large and ambitious as it is. Democratic senators have said in praise. Senator Tim Kaine called him, quote, the human embodiment of shifting the open window on the reconciliation bill and more. That's nice, but it doesn't speak to whether this bill is enough, does it? The Vermont senator wrote the $3.5 trillion figure was reached after compromise with others in the Democratic caucus and the Budget Committee, which he chairs. He also pointed out no Republicans will vote for the bill, which is a safe prediction. The bill, he said, will end the days of billionaires not paying a nickel in federal income taxes. Well, that's certainly good for democracy that they'll be paying more than a nickel in federal income taxes, or a nickel. By raising taxes on corporations and wealthy individuals, it's an opportunity for using hoarded wealth to uplift the middle and lower classes, he wrote, saying, quote, under this proposal, no family making under $400,000 a year will pay a nickel more in taxes and will, in fact, receive one of the largest tax cuts in American history. Well, that's good, but it is not an opportunity for using hoarded wealth to uplift the middle and lower classes, because no matter how much in taxes they collect from the hoarded wealth of the rich, that is not what's going to uplift the middle and lower classes. What will uplift the middle and lower classes is new appropriations and new money created by the Federal Reserve, which hopefully would improve their economic conditions. Meanwhile, the middle and low classes will receive a wide swath of benefits. The reconciliation bill will further extend, sorry, I lost the thread here, further extend $300 a month child tax credits, which is estimated to cut child poverty in half. Under the bill, community college will be free, and pre-kindergarten will be available for every child with a universal pre-K program. All of those are very good things and make the bill a worthwhile bill. But they certainly do not solve the problem of the just transition to a Green New Deal, and they do not in themselves constitute the green part of a Green New Deal. The bill takes steps to uplift the working class. It establishes universal paid medical and family leave. That certainly is good. Ending the international disgrace of the United States being the only major country on earth to not guarantee such benefits. As the Senate previously announced, the bill will also include provisions of the much anticipated PRO Act, which contains consequential provisions to make it easier for workers to organize and to unionize. All I have to say about that is it's nice the PRO Act is in this bill. But unless Bernie has guarantees from Chuck Schumer that the parliamentarian is either going and or guarantees from the president and Kamala Harris that we'll be hearing no more about them following the recommendations of the parliamentarian, then including those provisions in the reconciliation bill, the PRO Act provisions, don't mean a damn thing. If Bernie's going along with this act, and he's going to vote for it, he better have guarantees that the parliamentarian is not interfering this time, or if she does, that Biden and Harris are going to overrule her when the time comes. If he doesn't have that, he's got nothing when it comes to the PRO Act. Anyway, the Democrats' bill, which they plan to pass with a simple majority in the Senate, will also address the climate crisis with proposals like a civilian climate corps and a clean energy standard. It proposes expansions to Medicare and funding for affordable housing and opens pathways to citizenship for immigrants. All that, of course, is good, is worthwhile. How big will the civilian climate corps be? How much funding will go to it? How much funding will appear in the final bill? We do not know. The expansions to Medicare are important. If there's no lowering of the age of Medicare, though, to 60 or to 55, it won't cover any more people. It'll be good. I mean, it's going to be a goodie for people like me who already have Medicare. But for people like most of you who don't have it, it's not going to help you at all. Funding for affordable housing, that's great. Let's see what funding there is. Pathways to citizenship for immigrants, that's great too, if the pathways are practical and not crap like it's going to take 10 years or it's going to take 16 years or whatever the hell they're going to do. The pandemic has exaggerated nearly all of the issues that Democrats are aiming to address in the reconciliation bill, but the Republicans are against nearly all of its proposals, which means it's got to be passed through the reconciliation bill with the voting support of every damn Democrat, including Sinema and Joe Manchin. Many of the provisions in the reconciliation bill are, in fact, items that GOP members have negotiated out of Biden's original infrastructure packages. In other words, they added those back into this reconciliation bill. But there isn't time to work around Republican objections, Bernie said in his op-ed. Quote, the future of working families is at stake. The future of our democracy is at stake. The future of our planet is at stake. The future of our democracy is not at stake in this reconciliation bill. Now, the future of the planet is at stake in the whole endeavor, but probably not in this reconciliation bill alone. These slogans are less than entirely meaningful. Where's the minimum wage in this bill? Of course, the For the People Act is not in this bill. Of course, the John Lewis Voting Rights is not in this bill. And of course, the bill to stop state legislatures from overturning election decisions made by state and local officials is not in this bill. It's in those bills, those three bills, where the future of our democracy lies. Not so much in this particular bill. I had to note that to start off with. Now, it's a $3.5 trillion. It's got a lot of good spending and worthwhile spending in it. But now we're going to look at a recent piece by Lauren Elizabeth, which appeared in Medium. Guess what she has to say? It looks like Manchin is prepared to kill the reconciliation bill. Surprise, surprise. And there's Joe Manchin himself. Leading some press people down the street, as it were. I don't know what happened. I was able to access this story earlier when I first scheduled it for treatment here. So I'm pretty exercised that it is not available. Anyway, you get the picture from the headline, though. That's really the news. Joe Manchin is making noises which seem to indicate that he is not committed to the passage of the reconciliation bill. As of 2 days ago, that was July 27th. For him, it appears to be too big. He's not happy about the climate stuff in it. He still wants to obstruct, making noises of obstruction. He is not the only one. I now share a piece from Common Dreams. Piece by Jessica Corbett. And there's the lady herself, Kirsten Sinema, with Senator Lisa Murkowski, Mark Order, Rob Portman, Susan Collins, speaking to reporters as they arrive at the U.S. Capitol after meeting with President Joe Biden at the White House on June 24th, 2021. As bipartisan infrastructure deal is reached, Sinema comes out against the $3.5 trillion package. It's by Jessica Corbett, just yesterday, July 28th, 2021. Ahead of an imminent vote in the Senate on moving forward with a bipartisan infrastructure plan, Kyrsten Sinema on Wednesday announced her opposition to a proposed $3.5 trillion reconciliation package, potentially jeopardizing both efforts. As the Daily Beast Matt Fuller put it, if she stands by this, she'll kill the bipartisan deal too, unquote. So she worked so hard on this bipartisan deal, but she's ready to kill it anyway. Do you really think that's true? Or you think she's bluffing? Quote, House Democrats are going to go along with the bipartisan deal that comes at the exclusion of the reconciliation, aren't going to go along with a bipartisan deal that comes at the exclusion of the reconciliation bill, Fuller tweeted. So Kyrsten Sinema could single-handedly prevent any infrastructure investment. Well, is that true? Is it really true that the House Democrats aren't going to fold in the end, to cave like a cheap suit, if Nancy Pelosi asks them to? I think if she asks them to, they should run a vacate the chair move on her. If she so much as whispers that they got to cave, they got to remove her as Speaker of the House. They can do it. They can run a vacate the chair motion on her. Of course, they do need the cooperation of Pramila Jayapal in order to do that, because a vacate the chair motion is not a privileged motion. The privileged motion is one that requires a vote in a certain amount of time on the floor. But a vacate the chair motion is only a privileged motion if it comes from a party caucus or party conference. Well, the Congressional Progressive Caucus happens to be a party caucus. It actually has a budget from the Democratic Party in the House, making it an official party caucus. The chairperson of that caucus is Pramila Jayapal. So, the rest of the progressives in that caucus are going to have to get Pramila Jayapal to go along if they want to run a vacate the chair motion. On the other hand, if they have Pramila Jayapal's support, they're probably going to have at least 40, 50 people from the caucus on their side, not just the squad. That's plenty of votes to deny Pelosi the speakership any further. To send the let them eat ice cream lady home. Yes, indeed. However, let's draw back from this a little and let's ask the question. Let's not consider what the House may do. Let's just ask the question about the Senate. Bernie Sanders has said, he said to Crystal Ball, that if he doesn't have commitments about the $3.5 trillion the reconciliation bill, he's not going to vote for the bipartisan infrastructure bill. He said that. The question is he going to cave like a cheap suit? That's the first question. Never mind the House Democrats caving like a cheap suit. By the way, Nancy Pelosi says she's not taking up the bipartisan deal in the House until the reconciliation deal is passed in the Senate. That means the House has to pass the reconciliation deal, have to send it to the Senate, and the Senate has to pass it. And the House better make it clear that the Senate has to pass it without change before the reconciliation, before the bipartisan deal will be taken up. Will the House have the guts to do that? Will they have the guts to do that if they retain Nancy Pelosi as Speaker? Pretty big questions, right? Questions related to, are we going over an infrastructure cliff? In a statement about the reconciliation proposal, Sinema said, she said to Senate leadership and said to Joe Biden that, quote, while I will support beginning this process, I do not support a bill that costs $3.5 trillion. And in the coming months, I will work in good faith to develop this legislation with my colleagues in the administration. You're not working in good faith if you define from the beginning that you won't accept the bill, that you won't accept a $3.5 trillion bill, because that's what's on the table. I also have something to say to Bernie. Your $3.5 trillion bill is a compromise from your original $6 trillion bill. You can't take any more compromises. You already cut $2.5 trillion out of the original bill. You can't take any more out of this bill. You can't let Kyrsten Sinema bamboozle you. She got her bill, the bill she wanted, the bipartisan infrastructure bill. You tell her that bill goes down unless she cuts the crap and just goes along with the $3.5 trillion bill. Words like that have to be said to her and to Joe Manchin. And if they want to be responsible for letting the infrastructure bill go over the cliff, it would be on them. Sinema's potentially fatal blow to all efforts to pass federal legislation on physical and human infrastructure. Yeah, folks, there's a time to say no. There's a time to draw a line and to say no. As far as I'm concerned, we're past that time. They should have done it on the minimum wage. That's what I think. But now they got to do it or they're going to lose all credibility. When I say they, I mean Bernie Sanders. I mean the Sanders people in the House that he inspired to come into politics. They both have to be willing to say no, and the consequence is tanking both those bills and the Biden administration all at the same time. That's too bad. Let Biden save his own administration by starting to knock some heads for a change. That's what he needs to do. Sinema's potentially fatal blow to all efforts to pass federal legislation on physical and human infrastructure, given progressive lawmakers' threats to condition their support for a bipartisan bill on simultaneously advancing a bold reconciliation package, came the same day the White House and a group of lawmakers, including the Arizona Democrat, announced an agreement on the details of the bipartisan measure. A White House fact sheet says that the deal, which includes $550 billion in new federal investment, features spending on public transit, passenger rail, road and bridge improvements, water systems, high-speed intersects, clean energy, and electric vehicle infrastructure. There's very little for clean energy and electric vehicle infrastructure there, people. Very little. And very little for mass transit. Very little for mass transit. They didn't even get the 80-20 split for mass transit. A bunch of tweets about the bipartisan infrastructure package. A test vote could come tonight. The test vote was to bring it forward for debate. They won the test vote 67-32. So now they're going to debate the bipartisan infrastructure bill in the Senate. I suspect they may get enough votes to pass the bipartisan infrastructure bill. So Biden will be having his infrastructure bill, his bipartisan infrastructure bill. That's not going to get him to Congress in 2022. I mean, the fact is the House is on the line and the Senate is on the line too. And both of those will be going to the Republicans if there is not a Democratic victory on the $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill. That bill is needed to keep the expansion in the economy going. And it's also needed to make a start on the Green New Deal, at least a start on it, and a start on the just transition. That's all this bill is. It's not even the American Family Plan. It doesn't do enough on the American Family Plan. It's clear that as it stands, this plan's approach to the multiple crises we face is backwards, said Mitch Jones, policy director at the progressive advocacy organization Food and Water Watch. It underfunds our water systems and overfunds the industries killing our planet. He's talking about the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And he's exactly correct. Exactly correct. Our level of water funding laid out in this deal is wholly inadequate compared to the monumental challenges we face in providing clean drinking water to all and building climate-resilient infrastructure. The framework appears to limit privatization incentives to transportation projects, and as more details emerge, it is imperative we hold the line on preventing any wasteful, expensive privatization schemes from being included in this package. At the same time, this deal proposes spending billions on expensive and totally ineffective carbon capture technologies and related infrastructure. This is nothing more than a new set of fossil fuel subsidies that already cost taxpayers $15 billion a year. This is a gift to the fossil fuel polluters that have cynically seized on promoting carbon capture as a climate solution, when it is nothing more than a means of prolonging the dirty energy era. As the details of this deal are fleshed out, we implore lawmakers to do more to provide robust funding for our urgent water needs and to strike out wasteful fossil fuel subsidies. The Politico reports that the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer confirmed the procedural vote could occur as soon as Wednesday night. It did, and as I said, that procedural vote was passed 67-32. And by the way, the total price tag of the bill was going to be $1 trillion, but they were reallocating $450 billion in funding from the COVID relief bill, from the American Rescue Plan, and placing it into this bill. Now, that certainly assumes that the COVID crisis is more or less over and that they won't need that $450 billion for further COVID relief. That is a highly debatable proposition at this point, with the Delta variant continuing to run wild in the United States. So, will we need another sudden emergency bill to give back COVID relief money to the effort? That remains to be seen. It is iffy. Responding to developments ahead of the vote, Rania Epstein, executive director of MoveOn, said, quote, the bipartisan deal must only be the start, and let's be clear, it's not even remotely significant in and of itself. It now must be paired with a robust reconciliation package meets the size and scope of the challenges that too many Americans face. That's what Bernie is assuming. He's assuming. From Sunrise Movement, at Senator Sinema's constituents are already facing the climate crisis, and what does she do? Continuously try to shut down any possibility of providing funding for communities like hers to fight the climate crisis. We need leaders who will fight for us, not bargain with the initiative. You know, we really need initiatives and recalls for senators in midterm. We really need that. We've got to amend the Constitution to get that. We need leaders who will fight for us, not bargain with the GOP. So there you have it. Is Sinema going to go through with it? Is Manchin going to go through with it? So I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say I don't think that Manchin and Sinema have the stones to be responsible for the tanking of both of these bills. If Bernie sticks to his guns, they can't even get the bipartisan bill out of the Senate. Or they may not even be able to get it out of the Senate. He may not be able to tank it because maybe even without his voting for it, they would come up with 60 votes if enough of the Republicans come over. In that case, if it gets to the floor, he could not block the bipartisan bill. Then, of course, that would leave it up to the House. If he gives the word to the House Democrats, you got to hold the line on this. You got to stop the House from passing the bipartisan bill until we get the reconciliation bill through the Senate. Then that creates a situation where the bipartisan bill is held hostage. Would Sinema and Manchin have the stones to let both infrastructure bills die because they don't like the $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill? AOC responded on Twitter, directing her message at Sinema, quote, "Good luck tanking your own party's investment on child care, climate action, and infrastructure while presuming you'll survive a 3-vote House margin, especially after choosing to exclude members of color from negotiations and calling that a bipartisan accomplishment." Have to say, that's a pretty good tweet. As Common Dreams reported earlier this month, Ocasio-Cortez said that if Joe Manchin and other centrists opposed to various progressive priorities and the rest of the Senate approved the reconciliation bill, then we will approve their bipartisan bill. But if they try to strip immigration reform, child care, climate, etc., then we're at an impasse. And the New York Democrat said to Democracy Now! That progressive lawmakers are united in opposing bipartisan legislation without a reconciliation bill, a sentiment that was repeated Wednesday by Jayapal, chair of the CPC. So Jayapal appears to be leading on this herself. That, is excellent. Maybe if Pelosi proposes to fold, she will then have the guts to vacate the chair on Pelosi and get a vote for a privileged motion. Our caucus, Jayapal said, quote, "will continue to demand that Congress fulfill the mandate we were elected on to deliver necessary, urgent, and transformational change for working families," unquote. So let's see if they can do what they say they're going to do. As I say, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, I don't think that Sinema and Manchin have the guts to tank both bills through their opposition to the reconciliation bill. Not after they worked so hard on the bipartisan bill. I don't think they can afford to come away empty-handed on the bill they worked so hard to get. So let's see what happens. Time for the progressives to go to the mat. Let's see if they have the stones to do it. Okay, meanwhile, there are other things going on. Specifically, there's lots of debt terrorism going on in Washington right now. And we have the debt terrorist leaders themselves, the Peter G. Peterson Foundation, expressing their views on the debt and the deficit. What is the national debt today? 28,483,663,400 and I'm sorry, it keeps changing every minute. 647,272. Sorry, I couldn't read it fast enough before the clock changed. That's the debt clock. That's $86,235 for every American. Sure is lucky that we're not individually on the hook for that amount of money, isn't it? Because we are not. That's the government's debt. It's not our debt. Why is the national debt so high? It's the result of simple math, says the PGPF. Each year, there's a mismatch between spending and revenues. No, that's false. That's not why the growing debt is so high. The growing debt is so high because the government chooses to issue debt instruments rather than simply directly finance the spending by having the Federal Reserve top up the Treasury spending account. I'll go into this more deeply in just a few minutes. But when the federal government spends more than it takes in, says the PGPF, we have to borrow money to cover that annual deficit. False. No, we do not. We choose to borrow money to cover that annual deficit. And each year's deficit adds to our growing national debt. False again. It's not the deficit that is adding to our national debt. It's the issuance of debt instruments for sale to people in the securities market that is adding to our growing national debt. Historically, our largest deficits were caused by increased spending around national emergencies like major wars or the Great Depression. That is true. Today, our deficits are caused mainly by predictable structural factors. Our aging baby boom generation, rising healthcare costs, and a tax system that does not bring in enough money to pay for what the government has promised its citizens. The tax system, tax money, doesn't pay for anything. Tax revenue and bond revenue does not finance government spending. We have known that clearly now for 23 years. We've had the proof of that in a very great paper by Stephanie Kelt. We know taxes do not pay for government spending. That's false too. In other words, what the PGPF just said. I don't like our tax system. I don't like the regressive nature of our tax system. I want huge taxes on the wealthy. I'm not sure I want the huge taxes on the corporations. I don't know if that is necessary. I'm not sure it's effective. It made me more effective just to have 94% tax rates on the wealthy. The coronavirus crisis has accelerated an already unsustainable fiscal trajectory. Unsustainable fiscal trajectory? That's what the BGPF always says. Don't they know about Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution? The ability of the Congress to create as much money as it wants to create? They say both because of its devastating effect on the economy, that is the unsustainable fiscal trajectory, and the necessary legislative response. There isn't even a necessary legislative response to that, folks, because the president has the capability to mint 1-ounce platinum coins with face values to be determined by the Secretary of the Treasury. Our current national debt is only $28.5 trillion. The Treasury Department can have $100 trillion platinum coin minted and deposited at the Federal Reserve. And the proceeds can then be used to pay off the national debt as it falls due without us issuing any more debt. So even if the size of the debt was a problem for fiscal sustainability, even if we thought that was the case, which it's not, we could instantly make that a non-problem, or President Biden could, just by getting the $100 trillion coin minted. So that's another falsehood. It's just like almost every sentence is a lie. Once we have emerged from the pandemic, it will be critical for America's leaders to address our rising debt and its structural factors, which are described below. Our debt over time. Debt held by the public as a percent of GDP. In 2019, it was 79%. In 2020, it was 100%. In 2021, it's going to rise very little according to the projections. In fact, by 2026 and 2027, it will be hardly any higher than it is now. Let's see, what did he say about 2021? It'll be lower than it is now. It'll be at 101%, and it's 102% right now, according to the projection. It won't go up to where it is now again in 2028. Boy, we have a lot of time to do something about this between now and 2028. This is according to their projection, which isn't worth a damn because it comes from the CBO. But then for some reason, they've projected after 2028 an increasing rise in the level of the national debt as a percentage of GDP. What's causing that? It's because selling debt instruments is going to accelerate? Or is it because somehow their projections for GDP are very low? I don't know. But I do know that because we can afford to pay any size debt just by having the government create of the money and pay off the debt as it falls due. I do know that in this country, as long as it's a monetary sovereign, there is no such thing as an unsustainable fiscal debt. So the very premise of this graphic, the idea that the rise in the national debt will be unsustainable, is another lie. There are three major drivers of our growing national debt, according to BGPF. There's the demographics. Our society is aging as the large baby boom generation begins to retire. 10,000 will turn 65 every day through 2029. So what? What happens if our productivity increases between now and 2029? Maybe it won't matter a damn how many people have retired. It may not matter a damn. How do they know it's going to matter? So the projected senior population, 65 plus, wow, it's going up to 94.7 million by 2060. Right now, it's at 56.1 million, roughly, in 2020. It's 2021. They don't show the projection for 2021. Let's take 56.1 million, and let's divide it, 56.1 million, and let's divide it by 330 million. So, seniors are 17% of the population now. It's 40 years until 2060. Since the year 2000, our population has grown by roughly 30 million. If I'm not mistaken, we were at roughly but 300 million in the year 2000. Might even have been a little bit lower. Let's take, off the top of my head, let's say that it was 300 million. So we gained 30 million in 20 years. So that means that we might well gain 40 million more in population by 2060 and be at 370 million. I think I'm underestimating it because, it's likely that in numbers of people, there's going to be an acceleration because the base of population is larger today. It's 330 million than it was at 2010. I'm doing all this off the top of my head. But let's say 94.7 million divided by 370 now. Well, that would be about going up to about 26%. So that would be a significant gain over the 17% that we have today. However, as I said, let me do it now acceptable way. We grew by what percent? Let's say 30 million divided by 300. So we grew by 10% in the 20 years, and we're at 330 now. So 330 times 1.1 Oh, so that would give us actually 363 million over the next 20 years. It was put us up to 363 million. So let me multiply by 10% again for the next 20 years. We would actually be at nearly 400 million in 2060. Now let me do my division. And it looks like we'd be at 24%. So there would be a greater share of the population at 65 plus. So the question is, can we fund the increase in the proportion of the population who are retired? That depends on the growth in productivity over the next 40 years. Now you heard a lot of talk about AI this, AI that. Why would people shift to AI? The answer is that AI increases productivity by a good deal. There is every chance that the productivity growth over the next 40 years would be enough to absorb that extra 7% of the population within the retirement system. Do they have anything to say about that? No. They have nothing to say about that. In this graphic, they're not even thinking about that. They talk about the healthcare system, how much more we spend on healthcare compared to other advanced nations. Healthcare costs around the world. Spain, $3,616 per person. The UK, $4,653 per person. I'm not going to read everybody. France, $5,375 per person. Canada, $5,418 per person. Germany, $66.45. Switzerland, $77.32 per person. The OECD average, $4,033 per person. And the United States, $11,071 per person. That's what we were spending in 2019. I guarantee you it's close to $12,000 now in 2021, 1 year later, here in the United States, while it hasn't gone up by much in those other nations. We're spending 3 times the OECD average. And more than twice as much as the Canadians are spending. Why? Why? We all know the answer to that. Why won't the PGPF tell us that it's because we don't have Medicare for all? Why won't they level with us? Of course, PGPF assumes that our healthcare costs will be going out of sight because they'll talk about current law. And they'll say, well, we don't have Medicare for all under current law. So that's why we're projecting such a great increase in healthcare costs over a period of time. And they show us 2020 federal revenues and spending. Well, revenues from taxation, only $3.42 trillion, while our total spending in 2020, fiscal 2020, was $6.55 trillion. Huge deficit, right? That's the deficit. We sold bonds to make up the difference between the revenues from taxation and the total spending. We didn't have to, but we chose to do that. The interest, they say, goes up fast. They say we spend nearly $1 billion on interest every day. Given the benefit of the doubt, it's not $1 billion, or they would have said so. Let's say it's $1 billion. Give them the doubt. That's only $365 billion on interest. I say only because $365 billion on interest out of roughly a GDP of 22.5 trillion is less than 2% of GDP. We're spending less than 2% of GDP on interest per year. We've been spending a very low percentage of GDP on interest for years now. We used to spend a much greater amount, much greater proportion of our GDP on interest. We used to spend 5% during the early days of the Clinton administration. 5% of GDP on interest. All that's gone way down. Way, way down. Why? Because the Federal Reserve chose to keep it down. It's a policy variable. The Federal Reserve controls the policy variable. They project in 10 years our interest will double from where it is today. No, it's not going to double as a percent of GDP. That's within the control of the Federal Reserve. They don't have to let it double if they don't want to. And if we decided to go the route I suggested and not issue any more debt instruments at all, our interest would be precipitously falling over time until the outstanding debt that the government has now was fully liquidated. They say this is about our future. Why does the national debt matter? I can answer that question. Well, let's see what they say. What makes America strong is our willingness to build and leave a better future for the next generation. Unfortunately, our growing debt is doing the opposite. Well, I've pointed out why our growing debt is not doing the opposite at all, because that's also about the deficit. And of course, a government deficit is somebody else's surplus. We all know that by now. America faces many challenges, including rising inequality, unaffordable health care, a changing climate, failing education, crumbling infrastructure, and unpredictable security threats. To address these, we will need significant resources. Every dollar that goes toward interest payments means less resources. No. They say means less resources available to build a stronger, more resilient future. No. That is a lie. Another big, big, big lie. Why is it a big, big lie? Because if too many dollars are going towards interest payments, we can just create more dollars. We can make available as much in financial resources as we need to make available to build a stronger, more resilient future, because we are a monetary sovereign. PGPF knows that, but they will never say it, because the debt terrorism they do here, they couldn't do that anymore. They would be out of business. Every organization wants to stay in business. The business of the Peter G. Peterson Foundation is to frighten us all. It's to frighten us all. Why does the national debt matter? The national debt matters because of the Peter G. Peterson Foundation and other interests that are networked with them that keeps telling people over and over and over and over and over again that the national debt matters. People have come to believe that the national debt matters. And they keep on reinforcing that belief. That's why the national debt matters. But objectively, the national debt doesn't matter because we can always create the money to pay it off. So the true answer is it does not actually matter. But the other answer is it matters as a political matter. It's a political issue, which means that as a political matter, it makes sense to get rid of it, to not issue any more debt instruments, to use platinum coins and overt congressional financing to get rid of it. And they have some other graphics on this page. The vast majority of Americans believe that addressing our debt should be our priority. If that is true, and the surveys they do indicate that it is true, then why don't we just start paying it off? We can start addressing it by using the platinum coins or using overt congressional financing. Yes, we can. We can certainly do that. Let's now share the next article, which is one of mine. I might have shared it before. It's from 2018. I'm sharing it now from my site, josephfirestone.com. Guess what? It is July 29th. By July 31st, the debt ceiling is no longer suspended. The title of this article is, As the Debt Ceiling Approaches, a Fiscal Myth Echoes Across the Landscape of Politics. You just saw the fiscal myth in the PGPF piece, warning about impending government financial crisis and doing it in a manner that falsely constructs the problem situation presented by the limit and also falsely narrows the available alternatives to solve the problem. For example, an article recently appeared in Vanity Fair's The Hive, written by Bess Levin. Maybe she'll write another article now. Maybe she has written one already. I haven't checked. In 2018, she said, well, in 2018, there was the title of the article, quote, the GOP tax cut is draining the Treasury even faster than expected, unquote. That was misleading in itself because the Treasury wasn't being drained by the Republican tax cut, but by federal spending mandated by Congress, including spending to repay previous debt instruments as they fall due. As that spending took place, the Federal Reserve marked down the Treasury spending account, and it was that was draining the account. Why did Levin think the tax cuts were draining the Treasury account more rapidly than before? It's because she believed that federal revenue from federal taxes and bond sales funds federal spending. So she inferred that lower tax revenues, not compensated for by sales of more debt instruments, meant that less in reserves was being added to the Treasury spending account. But Levin was wrong about how federal spending is funded. It is actually funded by congressional appropriations or continuing resolution acts, followed by the Fed using its delegated authority from Congress to mark up the Treasury spending account with additional reserves. Taxes do not fund spending, and neither does revenue from the sale of Treasury securities. Yes, the Fed only acts to create new reserves for the Treasury under certain rules, which include draining both tax and bond sale derived reserves from private sector accounts. But the destruction of such reserves through marking down private accounts is an action distinct from creating new high-powered reserves in the Treasury spending account. Second, Levin also inaccurately says, quote, America's burn rate is speeding up, leaving Congress just a few weeks to raise the debt ceiling again. Granting that, quote, the burn rate is a metaphor, it is not increasing. If what Levin means by this is the rate of increase of Treasury spending, that is normal for this time of year. I think it's higher now because of the fact that we're spending more to recover from the recession caused by COVID. But if, on the other hand, if Levin meant by burn rate the rate at which the reserve balance in the Treasury spending account declines, then that phrase would be accurate, but it doesn't follow that Congress has just, quote, a few weeks to raise the debt ceiling again. There are other actions that Congress or the executive could take besides raising the debt limit to avoid a Treasury default. Assuming that is the consequence that Levin wants to avoid. These other things include both congressional and executive actions. The Congress could, if it desired, pass overt congressional financing. See the graphic below. Can I open this image in a new tab? I guess I can. This is overt congressional financing. I've gone over this a lot here. So it's 2 sentences. In every appropriations bill or money bill, upon passage of this appropriations bill, the Federal Reserve is directed to fill the Treasury spending account of the New York Fed with the addition to its reserve balance necessary to spend this appropriation. That's the first sentence. Second sentence. In addition, the Federal Reserve is directed to fill the Treasury spending account with the additions to the Treasury reserve balances necessary to repay all outstanding debt instruments, including principal and interest, as they fall due for the fiscal year of this appropriation. So that's it. Include that language in I shouldn't say the reconciliation bill, but in the appropriations bills. Include that language in them. And then the money is there up front before the Treasury Department has to spend it to fulfill the congressional appropriation. That's all overt congressional financing is. Second, Congress could just repeal the debt limit law and remove the debt ceiling for good. They could even do that by a 51-50 vote. They could even include that in the reconciliation bill if they wanted. Just a 2-sentence repeal of the debt ceiling law. Then if we need to sell more debt instruments, we can sell more debt instruments. Of course, if we do that, it has the disadvantage that we exacerbate the debt terrorism that's going to go on and the political problem of the debt, because before you know it, it'll be at $30 trillion and $32 trillion, and everybody will be tearing their hair out because everybody will say each of us owes. How much do we owe? We owe $95,000 a person. The third thing we could do is we could reorganize the Federal Reserve to nationalize the regional Fed banks, as I said, nationalize, and place them along with the Board of Governors and the Federal Open Market Committee under the supervision of the Secretary of the Treasury, who could then order the Fed to fill the Treasury spending account using its authority from Congress to create reserves so that Treasury could fill its congressional spending mandates. Any of these alternatives to raising the debt limit are available to Congress. Yep. For its part, the executive branch could mint a 1-ounce platinum coin with a face value large enough so that after the coin were transported to the New York Fed for deposit, its face value credited to the Mint's Public Enterprise Fund account, and the senior's profits from the Fed credited to the Treasury spending account, the total of reserves in that account would be enough to fulfill Treasury spending obligations to Congress for the foreseeable future. Such a coin, with a face value of $100 trillion, would probably be enough to fulfill such obligations for the foreseeable future. If it wasn't enough, we could always mint another $100 trillion coin. Or we could mint a quadrillion dollar coin. And that would last for 10 times the years of the $100 trillion coin, perhaps. Also, we could issue consols. What's a console? It's a treasury security that provides no date of repayment of principal, a perpetual bond. We could issue it at interest rates higher than those offered for debt instruments that repay the principal on a fixed date. Guess what? Consols are not subject to the debt limit law, because that law only applies to securities whose principal amounts are owed to the holder by the Treasury. So Treasury could issue consols right now. It doesn't need a buyer leave from Congress to issue consols. It could raise all kinds of money through those consols and avoid raising the debt ceiling. Maybe it could even force Congress to raise the debt ceiling, because it could say to Congress, hey, look, if you don't want to raise the debt limit, we'll just keep on issuing consols. And then you'll never get any regular Treasury bonds issued again. And your constituents won't like that, because they like the regular Treasury bonds. So, my next section is about faux fiscal responsibility, public purpose, and real fiscal irresponsibility. One of the things that Bess Levin began her article with is, one of the many things confirmed by the great tax bill melodrama of 2017 is that Republicans only pretend to care about fiscal responsibility, quote unquote, when Democrats are in power and tax cuts aren't on the line. With the opportunity to slash the corporate rate nearly in half, cries of, quote, I won't endorse a bill that adds 1 penny to the deficit, evaporated. And tacking on $1.5 trillion to the debt became no big deal. We all remember that, don't we? That's what they did. The assumption behind this passage is that, quote, fiscal responsibility, unquote, means spending to reduce or eliminate the annual budget deficit, so that Republicans were not only hypocritical in their loud allegiance to the doctrine of, quote, fiscal responsibility, unquote, but also did something fiscally irresponsible, because they passed a bill that increased the budget deficit by an average of $150 billion per year over 10 years. But this assumption is false, because it ignores the reality that since the federal government is a monetary sovereign that can at will create its own currency, there is no solvency problem arising from deficits or the level of national debt or the debt to GDP ratio arising from them. Remember the PGPF, fiscally unsustainable because there was a solvency problem. But there is no solvency problem. The solvency issue is a faux issue, and the attempt to define fiscal responsibility relative to that non-existent problem is wrong-headed in the extreme, and is proven to be a tool used against progressive economic legislation by those who favor austerity and inequality. In brief, a monetarily sovereign government like the United States cannot run out of money involuntarily, because it has unlimited authority to create whatever amount of money it needs. That doesn't mean it can spend whatever it wants or run as large a deficit as it wishes, because it has to evaluate its spending options against their likely impact, including inflation and whatever undesirable consequences it might create by spending on the wrong things or spending in the wrong way. So the test of fiscal responsibility then becomes the impact of proposed spending, rather than a non-relevant mathematical criterion of too much spending, such as the debt to GDP ratio or the face value of the principal of outstanding debt instruments previously sold, tied to the mistaken notion that the government can be forced into insolvency if it spends too much. The criterion I favor for evaluating fiscal responsibility in place of solvency-related mathematical criteria is public purpose. By the way, that's why I and a few others started the organization called the Center for the Public Purpose. Public purpose is a composite involving many dimensions. We need not review it here in detail, but it includes full employment, price stability, basic economic rights, economic inequality, and a number of other criteria related to real outcomes rather than fiscal myths. As a matter of fact, last time I looked at my own thinking on public purpose, I think, in my theory of public purpose, it involves 52 dimensions, which I will not list here. So Levin's charge of fiscal irresponsibility against the Republicans, oh, screw that, sorry. I inadvertently clicked on an ad. So Levin's charge of fiscal responsibility against the Republicans on grounds of running too large a deficit evaporates in light of the reality of monetary sovereignty and the criterion of public purpose. However, that does not mean the Republicans are not acting fiscally irresponsible now, whereas they were practicing hypocritical fiscal responsibility earlier. It means instead that the Republicans were fiscally irresponsible earlier because their legislative activities opposed public purpose. And now they're still fiscally irresponsible because they have passed a huge tax cut, which is likely to both increase inequality and also poverty, both of which are important dimensions of public purpose. Well, I'm not going to go on with this, but I think you get the point. We are not running out of money. We are on the point of refusing to create more money because the Republicans are trying to block the federal government from creating any more money. That is what is going on here. So, my conclusion. Why are there so many errors in the post of Bess Levin and also other journalists writing about debt ceiling crises? I suppose there are many reasons: the need to write too many stories to meet the expectations of editors, the need to maximize brevity, the need to minimize research, the need to copy the stories of others to save time, the need to reinforce the perspectives of significant others in one's environment, and other pressures in the journalistic environment, including the pressure to be politically correct by not straying far from received wisdom. But I think the most important factor in producing the error-filled narrative in Levin's post and in the others I've referenced is that the authors cannot entertain alternative narratives about how federal funding and spending happens or about the additional alternatives that exist for solving a debt ceiling problem, because they wear neoliberal ideological blinders taught to them in universities teaching neoliberal approaches to economics. Since 2009, much digital and actual ink has been spilt attempting to break through these binders by educating people about heterodox economic paradigms, providing alternative accounts to the neoliberal view of how federal spending happens. But journalists are among the most conservative of thinkers when it comes to writing about economics, and they adhere strongly to the neoliberal view that governments do and ought to get their spending money only from already existing net financial assets. They seem wedded to a fixed pie of the world when it comes to acquiring the financial assets. So I will stop there, except to point out that we are seeing debt terrorism right now. It has, in fact, come back. The news is full of people standing up and talking about how things are going to cost too much, or we're going to run out of money, or we can't afford it. There was a whole brace of Senate Republicans the other day having a news conference about how the Democrats are spending too much, and we're going to run out of money, we're going to run up the debt, and that's going to be bad for our grandchildren. And they were going through the whole PGPF song and dance in front of everybody. I don't know if all 50 of their senators were there, but it was a mighty big group. And each of them was talking in succession about their fiscal austerity reasons for wanting to stop the Democrats. This is a bunch of hooey. They want to stop the Democrats from spending on people because they want to defeat the Democrats in 2022. That's the only thing this is about. By now, most of those senators already know about the deficit myth. By now, they know at least the basics. They are lying anyway. And I don't want to restrict my remarks to saying they're the only one who is lying anyway. Many Democrats just love to talk about how taxes pay for public spending. I mean, on Rising today, both the liberal Kim Iverson and the conservative Robbie Zoev were both talking about how tax dollars were going for this or going for that. And how it was our tax dollars going for these things. By now, certainly, Kim's got to know that tax dollars never pay for anything. But she still is using the old trope because it fills the space, and it's easy to develop outrage from people by telling them, it is your tax dollars going for these unnecessary and foolish things that we're all opposed to. Why can't they just tell the truth and say, U.S. government dollars are being spent in your name for things that are unnecessary or that are creating horrible impacts? They're using your government and the people you elected, the corporations and the donors, to loot the public treasury. Isn't that enough of a crime? Do you have to talk about tax dollars doing that? No, I don't think you do. But that debt terrorism is now coming back. Now, there was one final article. I'm not going to go over it. It's an article from The Week. I will share it for a second so you get a look at the title. Only take a minute. It's by James Pethokoukis. I think that's how you pronounce his name, from The Week. Okay, the disappointing GDP report is a wake-up call for Democrats. He did this today on 9th, and he's going through the inflation scare, which he believes in. Points out, in the last quarter, the economy grew at 13% pace, not taking into account inflation. He complains, when you take into account inflation, It's only 6.5%. When has it ever been 6.5%? 6% is astronomical growth for the United States. Yet he's complaining. He's complaining about all that money the feds, okay, are spending. And of course, he's going to talk about here how, or somebody off this article is going to talk about why we can't just keep on spending. But look, I got to give him credit. At least he's making the inflation argument. I don't think there's any reason to believe we're going to get a whole bunch of inflation from this, as I've gone over many times here before with different articles explaining why these inflationary tendencies are not going to last. But still, at least he's making the old arguments, spending on people versus inflationary consequences. That's at least a trade-off that makes some sense. Whereas the sustainability trade-off, that doesn't make any sense at all. So, what I'm warning you about is that during this debt ceiling crisis, there is going to be a Donnybrook over the idea that we are spending too much. And it's those kinds of arguments that are going to be used by the centrists in the Democratic Party, the so-called centrists. I consider them right-wingers too. And of course, all the Republicans. Those arguments will be used to try to knock down Bernie's $3.5 trillion bill into lower dollars. Every dollar they cut is going to cost people something, because the reconciliation bill doesn't appear to have any BS private sector deals to pay off the companies. That's the bipartisan piece. But the $3.5 trillion is for us. And those people are going to work like hell to try to cut out the money that is due us. And my recommendation is that our people, if they know what's good for them, need to say no. If the reconciliation bill doesn't pass, the bipartisan bill doesn't pass either. Biden gets nothing. Sure, you guys will take over the Senate in 2022. That will be a disaster. You'll take over the House in 2022. That will be a disaster. But guess what? Guess what? There's an upside to that. There'll be no more Nancy Pelosi after that. She'll go home and eat her designer ice cream for the rest of her days. And also, some of you centrists are going to be defeated anyway. Because if things go bad for the Democrats, why the hell should you be retaining your seats? And the same goes for the centrists in the House. Whenever there's a disaster, they're the ones who get cleaned out. The more lefty Democrats in safe districts, they still win. Abigail Spanberger's got something to worry about. Elaine Luria has got something to worry about. Josh Gottheimer might have something to worry about, though his district is full of people who are Republicans anyway. They vote for him because they think he's a Republican. But anyway, you're getting the picture. There will be an upside we will lose a lot of people in 2022 who are not doing any good for us anyway. And then in 2023, we can run like hell on what needs to be done. On what needs to be done. And maybe we can get enough progressives in to bully Biden and make him do it. Anyway, if he continues to follow the course of action he's following now, he stands to lose a tremendous amount in the election of 2022. His presidency, in the end, would become just another failure by a centrist Democrat. I close on that note, and I'll be considering your comments now. And back to the beginning, I went through a number of things. And Steve said, so I did a super chat on Hard Lens Media and plugged the Saturday show. Thank you, Steve. And Carmen says, where's Bonnie? Hi, Bonnie. Bonnie is here.
Hi.
She's right here. Amber says, what's coming up for the Saturday show? I'm going to be interviewing Kit Cabello of Hard Lens Media on the Saturday show, Amber. At least as far as I know, that's the engagement at this point. I don't have any contrary information. He's scheduled for 9 p.m. I believe the engagement has been made. It was made by Shane Coughlin. And I believe Kit will be on the show, as Dolores Pierce says. Kay says, I doubt it will pass anyway. Lana says, then we have Cinema. Kay says, Cinema is already saying she won't vote for it. And Steve says, Kit Cabello from Hard Lens Media will be the special guest on Saturday. And Erin Taylor says, I read an article called Cinema a Preening Phony, laugh out loud. Amber says, I understand Biden has a bill for elder care. I'm not sure if that's included in the infrastructure bill or a separate bill, but I'm very curious how the funding will be allocated. Yes, so am I. I think there is elder care in the infrastructure bill. Will there be a job training program to meet the demand for caregivers? I hope so, because it's all well and good to pay caregivers more and keep more elderly in their homes that were already shorthanded on a regular basis. There's never enough caregivers to meet the demand. So unless there's a job training program, well, Amber's quite right about that. And Lana says, Aaron, that's putting it politely, laugh out loud. Steve Wolfbrandt, what does a civilian climate corps do exactly? They're going to specify that in the act. We have to see the language. But basically, they're going to do things to try to create a more green environment. I don't know what the specifics will be. We have to look at the language of the bill. Kay says all kinds of things, Steve, depending on where they are. That's true too. Evelina says, while good things, universal pre-K and tax breaks for people with kids, if the Green New Deal does not pass, kids will be staying home and so will their parents with frequent extreme climate events. Businesses will also have to close on a consistent basis. Can we put Manchin and Cinema in a stockade outside the Capitol and throw rotten fruit and vegetables at them? Maybe we ought to experiment with that, Lana, see how it goes. Carmen says, I'd help with that, Lana. Kay says, Cinema needs to go. 39 people arrested for a sit-in at her house a few days ago, including the Reverend Barber and Reverend Jesse Jackson. Both arrested for a sit-in at her house. Kay says, all privatization, I thought it was at her office, but okay. Kay says, all privatization in their bill too. Carmen says, and now here in Miami, we also have the Colombian variant. Oh, yes, I heard about that as well. I don't even think that has a name. It should have a name with the Greek alphabet, right? Balana says, oh no, Carmen. Kay says, other progressives say they won't vote for it either. Carmen says, yeah, Lana, just reported yesterday, 10% of infected COVID patients are infected with the Colombian variant. It's probably not as bad as Delta. The article didn't elaborate on that. Carmen says, probably not. Connection. My device has a bug. Carmen says, I thought that damn clock was taken down. No, it's never going to be taken down. What will happen is that eventually, if that clock is still there because we still are issuing debt, it will become that measures the outstanding private sector net savings. It will be the net savings clock instead of the net debt clock. Lana says, Peterson groaned. Amber says, I have a dumb question. Is QE included total debt figure? No. Is it included when totaling the cash in circulation? It's included when totaling the reserves in circulation. Okay. The reason why it's not included, okay, in the debt figure is that QE involves a swap, okay, between the Federal Reserve and private sector entities. The Federal Reserve creates money out of thin air and swaps the money for financial assets supposedly of equal value coming from the private sector. So the easiest example to understand is that the banks will often be holding treasury debt. So what happens is that the money newly created by the Federal Reserve is swapped for an equivalent amount, dollar for dollar, okay, of treasury debt. So that's kind of the paradigm case for such a swap. But since there is no additional treasury debt included, it is not a part of the total debt figure. Okay, the total debt figure is just the sum total of outstanding treasury debt instruments. Okay, that's the definition of it, the real definition of it. It's not the cumulative total of taxes spending minus taxes. That is not actually the definition of it. Okay, the definition of it is the principal value of the total outstanding debt instruments. Kay says tax the rich. Kay says cut the military spending too. Kay says if we don't do a hell of a lot on climate change, we won't be here to worry about it all. That's becoming more and more important. Kay says Hartman had a guy on today that's been in the Arctic watching what is going on there. It isn't at all good. It's terrible. And Evelina said it snowed in southern Brazil today. Oh, that's a very rare event, isn't it? Kay says, is that unusual, Evelina Pont? Oh, yeah. People went out in sweaters, skimpy jackets, MAS sneakers. Don't even think they own snow gear. Evelina says, and sneakers. Who are we paying the interest to on the national debt? We are paying the interest to the entities that have earned the interest on their debt instruments. That's who we're paying. So it's going to be the holders of those debt instruments. If, for example, the Chinese government is holding on national debt instruments, we are paying the interest to the Chinese government. Now, the way it works is that we actually pay the interest to the reserve account of the Chinese government at the Federal Reserve. And when we pay off the principal, then we pay that money into the Chinese account at the Federal Reserve, the Chinese government account, okay, at the Federal Reserve. If it's a Chinese company that owns the national debt, then we pay it into the account of that company at the Federal Reserve, or any other company, okay, at the Federal Reserve. One favorite expression, okay, of the MMTers is that when we pay off the debt, it only means we shift dollars from the securities account of the holder to the reserve account of the holder. To use an analogy from regular banking, the securities account of the holder is like a CD, okay, in a regular bank, and the reserve account of the holder is like a checking account at the regular bank. So, maybe the best way to understand it. Kay says, I shared the conversation with that guy on my Facebook page and to the Environmental Coffee House site. Was scary information, I see, yeah, it's scary information. Evelina Punt says, raging fires in Turkey right now, but of course it's not the news in the news. Guess it's not important. It's not important to the news media. It's not important to the news media. They don't own property in Turkey. Kay says, we have already totally screwed up the northern jet stream and it can't be fixed. The Arctic is melting and adding more methane to the air all the time. And methane has 80 times the strength of CO2 in polluting the atmosphere, of course. Shake my head, we are screwed. And adding greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. Kay says, none of the climate change info seems to be covered much on MSN. They don't want anyone to know how bad it is. They are so irresponsible. They're so irresponsible. They should all be put out of business. They don't belong in business. They're not doing their jobs. Pure and simple. And Ghostart says, Bernie, quote, the president can't just snap his fingers to make things happen. Crystal says executive action. And Bernie, I can't read those icons. What Bernie's probably doing is laughing. That is why I watch Hartman's show and others on YouTube. Hartman is seeing it firsthand as he is living in Portland, Oregon. I think at this point in human history, the future is impossible to predict. But massive wealth inequality, AI, robotics, UBI, pandemics, climate catastrophe, technology doubling faster and faster. Yes. Lana says, I've tried to get through to Kim Iverson. She refuses to learn. I gave up. Yeah, she refuses to learn a lot of things. And Russell says, I turned Rising off when she started that shit. Yeah. So, Russ, who's better? Is it the combination of Kim Iverson and Robbie Zohar, or the combination of Ryan Grimm and Emily Jashinsky? I mean, what do you think? I'm for Grimm and Jashinsky. And Carmen says, Bernie still does it too. Makes me want to steal his comb. Kay says, can't stand those two on Rising. Grimm is pretty okay, though. Yeah, I mean, I think that Grimm at least gives good information from time to time. And he knows a little bit, okay, of MMT by now, actually, more than a little bit. So on those grounds alone, he is much preferable to Kim Iverson. The only knock, okay, on Grimm is that, well, he seems like a rather taciturn, relatively quiet person. He's much more colorful on Twitter than he is when he's on Rising. Evelina says, it's predictable, sadly, we're doomed. Carmen says, Joe, your program tonight is pure fire. Thank you, Carmen. I sadly agree, Evelina. Alana says, should we be making some Twitter and FB noise about the absurd, unnecessary debt ceiling. Yeah, we should be making lots of Twitter noise about that and about what a false issue it is and how it can be handled by most easily by Biden doing an executive order minting the platinum coin. Kay says, just hope I'm gone before it gets much worse. Evelina says, I think about all the unnecessary suffering. It makes my blood boil. Steve says, I'm getting old, but I won't want to stick around a couple more decades just to see how it turns out. Hopefully the aliens will arrive. No, not the immigrants. And uh, I'm sorry, I went down too fast. And Kay says, me too, Evelina. Carmen says, another voting rights fighter went to jail today. I know. Steve Wolfbrand said, don't watch Rising. Breaking Points is better. I watch Breaking Points too. And I watch Rising. Why do I watch Rising? Because I'm still not convinced they won't have a pretty good program in the end. But Breaking Points is better. And I watch Breaking Points too. I watch a lot of stuff. I cram a lot of stuff. Okay, I watch The Vanguard too. I watch Frank Analysis. I watch Convo Catch. Evelyn says, actually, migrations will grow even inside the country. People will be on the move. Yes, I agree. Steve Wolfman said, Breaking Point. Sorry. Kay says, I watched that too. Have you seen Ilhan's guaranteed income tweet? I tagged you, but didn't see any details yet. Yeah, I know you tagged me, and I haven't had a chance to see any details on it also. Kit mentioned something about indie media when I plugged your show. Maybe indie sent him over. It's at 2 hours and 30 minutes on today's broadcast. Thank you, Steve. Russ Goldman said, gotta call it a night. I've enjoyed listening and doing my bookkeeping. Good night, Russ. Steve Wolfbrand says, I've been watching the national debt rising all my life. Doesn't seem to matter much. The economy seems to grow out of it as we move along. Of course. But that's not why it's all right. It's all right because it doesn't mean anything to a monetary sovereign. CoStar says, LA just made it illegal to be homeless. I know, I noticed that. It's terrible. Amber says, this was great. Thank you, everyone. Love to Joe and Bonnie. Good evening. And love to you, Amber. But also, if you're still here by any chance a few minutes later, then I did want to say a couple of things before I go. So let me see. First of all, there's Kit coming on Saturday, but also what I wanted to do is to say, but just to point out, Biden should do 4 executive orders quickly. The first is the platinum coin. Get the platinum coin out there. The second is forgiving all student debt. The third is signing an executive order granting free Medicare coverage to all Americans. And the fourth is sign an executive order legalizing marijuana. Those 4 executive orders would drive Biden's popularity through the roof. And then he can get Sinema and Manchin to move. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Steve Wolfbrand says, watch the Environmental Coffee House with Sandy Shellis for good info on climate change. Yes, Sandy is very good on climate change. And Lana Dell says, Ryan Green gets a lot of flack, but I like him. I like him the most of the time. As do I, Lana. I like him most of the time, but I'm prepared always to see him sell out on something or other. it's, just in the nature of the beast. As long as he works for The Intercept, he's going to do that. How long is he going to work for The Intercept? I don't know. I suppose as long as they have him. He does get paid very, very well there. He has a wife and young children. Needs to provide for his family. It's expensive to live here in Washington. That's what's going on with him. He would sell out a lot less if he didn't have that particular situation. Steve says The Rising sucks. They stole the show from Crystal and Sagar. Well, the Rising people owned the features of the show. Crystal and Sagar developed that for them. They did work for hire for The Rising, and they got paid handsomely for it. Steve Wolfbrand says, by Ross Goldman, good night. And Ghost Start says, grim shot. Case says, laugh out loud, Biden will do none of those things. We got to keep pressing on him to do those things. Solana Dell said, I like Sandy. Is she on Twitter? You mean Sandy Degg? I haven't seen Sandy Degg around either on Twitter or on Facebook for ages.
She's all right?
Oh, no. No, Sandy's fine.
Oh, okay.
I mean, she's fine as of a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
Carmen says, do you think Biden even knows about the platinum coin possibility? Yeah, I think he does because it came up during the Obama administration. Steve says, none of those things are going to happen, Doc, sadly. Steve, we got to ask for those things. We got to ask for things that aren't going to happen. Why? Because if we don't ask for things, they're certainly not going to happen. That's why. Sandy Shellis, Lana says. Is Sandy Shellis on Twitter? I don't know offhand, but I'll look for her. I will look for her. I don't think I've seen her on Twitter for a long time, if she's still on there. Anyway, I think we have reached the end. Thank you for coming. Thank you for staying. Hope you liked this one. I certainly did. I'm looking forward to Saturday's conversation with Kit. I think that one is going to be a rip snorter, whatever that is. And Dolores says, thank you and good night all. Kay says, thank you all for a great discussion. I love you all. And we love you too, Kay. And Steve Wolfbrand says, Debbie, the sane progressive, used to have a great show until she couldn't take it anymore. Yeah, she did. She had a lot of very good shows. Steve Wolfbrand says, good night, everyone. Good night, Steve. Thank you for coming. And don't give up. As Jamie Galbraith says, we got to make an honorable fight. That's what this is about.